Okay, so these conversations need to be had just to get a better understanding of each other here. As always, it's necessary. It's necessary. Um, Now we know that race is it's a social construct. These terms, black and white, they are used to describe groups of people. Um, like I'm wearing a black shirt. I'm brown, if anything. That doesn't describe me. There are no actual black people, according to these colors. There are no white people, according to these terms. Like I mean, what this there are no people that are actually this color. My shirt's black. This is a brown hand on a brown man. But anyway, it's just for the sake of using these terms to just move along the conversation. We'll just say black and white. Okay. So anyway, I'll just get in here and say what's up to the chat real quick. Real quick, like so. All right, what's up? Stars not far. What's up, man? Jay Bird, Raphael Flat Plane, Ramon Fontanes, Ramon Fontanes. My bad. Ron Fig, what's happening? Eddie Machete, Fred Carr, what's good? Chris Ricks, Chase, what's happening? Mega Bills, what's up? What's up? Jacobim, what's good? Roz Tafari, Roz Ox Tafari, what's happening? Taminka McKinley, what's good? Nemo Haas, what's happening? H-Town Black, what's good? Leroy Meeks, straight up. Alright, folks. So look, just saying what's up to the folks, because I appreciate my people. What's up, Carolyn Gutman, CZOS? You're a trip on Instagram, by the way, CZO. The stuff you post, man, I promise. Monstar, XO, what's good? Zulu One's in the house. What's up, man? D Carter, what's up, Mark? Alright. India Jamaris, Seminole Indian, what's good? What's good? Robert Kardaki, what's happening? Kanga Kong, what's good? Oh, snap, my man King 7 in here. What's good, bro? Ro, how you doing? Alright, Tim Michaels. Hey, Adam Meekin, what's good? What's good? Okay, so check it out. I just want to I really do want us to be able to communicate. I really do. I'm not I don't do these things to sow division, things like that. That's not what I'm about. You know me. Quit playing. I would love for us all to get along, but there, in we all know that communication is the key to any relationship, and that works across the plane. That works in civil situations. It works at the workplace, at stores, wherever. Okay, but we need to understand each other better so we can have these conversations. So the thing is it's difficult. What's up, Big Dread? What's happening, bro? Um, Shout out to Big Dread in the house. Question everything. Truth Tube, get over there. Truth Tube. But check it. It's difficult having these conversations because our definitions aren't always in alignment. If we're speaking two different languages, it makes it a little bit tougher to understand each other. So this lady, Robin DiAngelo, she wrote a book. The book was titled White Fragility. Try not to be upset about that. We're just using these terms just cause that's the name of her book. It is what it is. Shout out to Cross-Eyed Cricket Farms. I appreciate that super chat. Appreciate it. But she wrote this book, and I've watched this lecture a few times, and there are some things that need to be understood. It all starts, I believe, with the definition of racism in people's head, and she does a really good breakdown about this. I may hop in to talk a little bit during this thing, but I mean, she just covers everything so well that there's not really a whole lot that I need to say. So I just wanted to watch this with everyone and I'll just be in the chat, reading, trying to get feedback, see, how everybody's feeling. But let me go ahead and set this mic up to hear her, because she's the one spitting the facts over here. So, boom, here we go. Unmute that. All right.
My name is Misha Stone, and I'm a Reader Services librarian in the Reader Services Department. And before we begin this evening, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered together on the ancestral land of the Coast Salish people. So together, let us honor their elders, past and present. We thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to the library, and thank you for joining us for this reading with Dr. Robin DiAngelo. DiAngelo's essays and talks have been so important and revelatory to me. I know that I'll be reckoning with my own internalized racism, with my own socialization, and trying to reduce harm throughout my entire life, both personally and professionally. And what I love about the book, White Fragility, is that it crystallizes so much of what I've heard her say and write all in one place in a way that I can continue to move through it, continue to reference it. So I'm so honored to be here for the book launch for White Fragility. So we're all here tonight for White Fragility, and there's a lot of buzz about this book already. It's only been out for 2 days. And I think it's testament to the fact that this topic's time has come. Poet Claudia Rankine said, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility brings language to the emotional structures that make true discussions about racial attitudes difficult. With clarity and compassion, DiAngelo allows us to understand racism as a practice not restricted to bad people. In doing so, she moves our national discussions forward with new rules of engagement. And Michael Eric Dyson, who wrote the lovely foreword, called it a vital, necessary book, a bracing call to white folk everywhere to see their whiteness for what it is and seize the opportunity to make things better now. Please welcome Dr. Robin DiAngelo.
Thank you so much. Okay, that was such a rush. Before I launch in, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to read a little bit, riff a little bit, kind of guide you along with some slides. But I do want to reiterate that this talk is happening on the ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples. And I believe very, very deeply that if we don't know our history, if we cannot trace the past into the present, we cannot explain current conditions in ways that are transformative rather than victim blaming. And I think today it's very, very clear when we see struggles around water rights at Standing Rock, the Duwamish yet again denied federal recognition, which denies treaty rights and sovereignty. These struggles are never separated from the present. At the same time, a piece of white fragility is that white people are not taught their history. We don't know our history. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to position myself, of course, as a white person, and I'm talking to addressing a very, very specific dynamic. This is arguably the most complex, nuanced social dilemma since the beginning of this country. And there are myriad roads in, and all of them are essential, but so consistently left off the table is whiteness, right? So we often learn about this group and that group and their struggles and their triumphs and their heroes and heroines, and yet we don't ask ourselves struggles and triumphs in relation to whom, right? And so, again, I'm going to focus on white folks and white people. I do use humor. And I want to say a little bit about why I use humor. Some of it is my style, and also because there's so much tension and so much anxiety and so much charge and so much defensiveness and on for white people around race, that we can, when we begin to get challenged, we can shut down really quickly or glaze over or tune out. And all of those, of course, function to protect our positions and hold our worldviews in place. And so the laughter can help release some of that. If we can laugh at this, and mock it a little bit, to be direct, it can help us then step back and not take ourselves so seriously, and hopefully again open it up. And I want to say that this is killing people of color, right? This is very, very serious. So my humor is not meant to trivialize that, but it is a strategy, one of many that I use in order to try to air this out and open it up. So I want to start by reading a bit from the beginning. White people in North America live in a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race, and white people are the beneficiaries of that separation and inequality. As a result, we are insulated from racial stress at the same time that we come to feel entitled to and deserving of our advantage. Given how seldom we experience racial discomfort in a society we dominate, we haven't had to build our racial stamina. Socialized into a deeply internalized sense of superiority that we either are unaware of or can never admit to ourselves, we become highly fragile in conversations about race. We consider a challenge to our racial worldviews as a challenge to our very identities as good, moral people. Thus, we perceive any attempt to connect us to the system of racism as an unsettling and unfair moral offense. The smallest amount of racial stress is intolerable. The mere suggestion that being white has meaning often triggers a range of defensive responses. And these include emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and withdrawal from the stress-inducing situation. These responses work to reinstate white equilibrium as they repel the challenge, return our racial comfort, and maintain our dominance within the racial hierarchy. I conceptualize this process as white fragility. Though white fragility is triggered by discomfort and anxiety, it is born of superiority and entitlement. White fragility is not weakness per se. In fact, it is a powerful means of white racial control and the protection of white advantage. In my early days of work of what was then termed a diversity trainer, I was taken aback by how angry and defensive so many white people became at the suggestion that they were connected to racism in any way. The very idea that they would be required to attend a workshop on racism outraged them. They entered the room angry and made that feeling clear to us throughout the day as they slammed their notebooks down on the table, refused to participate in exercises, and argued against any and all points. I couldn't understand their resentment or disinterest in learning more about such a complex social dynamic as racism. These reactions were especially perplexing when there were few or no people of color in their workplace, and they had the opportunity to learn from my co-facilitators of color. I assumed that in these circumstances, an educational workshop on racism would be appreciated. After all, didn't the lack of diversity indicate a problem, or at least suggest that some perspectives were missing? Or that the participants might be undereducated about race because of scant cross-racial interactions? It took me several years to see beneath these reactions. At first I was intimidated by them, and they held me back and kept me careful and quiet, but over time I began to see what lay beneath this anger and resistance to discuss race or listen to people of color. I observed consistent responses from a variety of participants. For example, many white participants who lived in white suburban neighborhoods and had no sustained relationships with people of color were absolutely certain that they held no racial prejudice or animosity. Other participants simplistically reduced racism to a matter of nice people versus mean people. Most appeared to believe that racism ended in 1865 with the end of enslavement. There was both knee-jerk defensiveness about any suggestion that being white had meaning and a refusal to acknowledge any advantage to being white. And over time, I began to see what I think of as the pillars of whiteness, the unexamined beliefs that prop up our racial responses. I could see the power of the belief that only bad people were racist, as well as how individualism allowed white people to exempt themselves from the forces of socialization. I could see how we are taught to think about racism only as discrete acts committed by individual people rather than as a complex, interconnected system. And in light of so many white expressions of resentment toward people of color, I realized that we see ourselves as entitled to and deserving of more than people of color deserve. I saw our investment in a system that serves us. I also saw how hard we worked to deny all this and how defensive we became when these dynamics were named. In turn, I saw how our defensiveness maintained the racial status quo. And none of the white people that I identify, whose actions I describe in this book, would identify as racist. In fact, I think they would most likely identify as racially progressive and vehemently deny any complicity with racism. Yet all of their responses illustrate white fragility and how it holds racism in place. These responses spur the daily frustrations and indignities people of color endure from white people who see themselves as open-minded and thus not racist. This book is intended for us, for white progressives who so often, despite our conscious intentions, make life so difficult for people of color. I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. And I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not racist, or is less racist, or is in the choir, or already gets it. White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think we have it, we're going to put all of our energy into making sure you think that we have it, and none of it into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, right? White progressives do indeed uphold and perpetrate racism, but our defensiveness and certitude make it virtually impossible to explain to us how we do so. So I'm pretty sure I'm speaking to a room filled with white progressives. So let me just be clear, you are not the choir. There is no choir. I am not the choir. When I say there is no choir, it's because my learning will never be finished. And this moment I think I'm the choir, I think I'm going to be done and I'm going to have certitude. I often joke, but on some levels it's kind of true. When I first applied to be that diversity trainer back in the early 90s, I thought, well, of course I'm qualified to lead discussions on racism. I'm a vegetarian. How could I be racist? Now, I would need to be vegan today, but you know, in the 90s, that was pretty alternative, right? I even got called a communist once when I said, no, I'm a vegetarian. But you know, my point is, I just thought it was all about open-mindedness and alternativeness. And let me just say that, you know, I love Seattle, and everything I learned about white fragility, I learned here working with white progressives. So, chapter 1, challenges to talking to white people about racism. All right? I have never met a white person who did not have an opinion on racism. Have you? If you are not sure that all white people have opinions on racism, just bring it up the next time you're around a bunch of white people. Maybe tonight when you have a drink in Ballard after the talk. And see how that goes. Not only do we all have opinions, but they tend to be very emotionally charged, and that has nothing to do with whether they're informed or not. I have an opinion on virtually everything, but that does not make them informed. I don't believe you can grow up or spend any significant time in the United States without developing opinions on racism, and they will be emotional and strongly held. And again, that has nothing to do with whether they're informed. And in fact, if you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily very limited. And no, a trip to Costa Rica, multiracial nieces and nephews, right? these are not sustained, steady struggle and focus. Now, how can I say that when I don't know most of the people in this room? And this, of course, is the first thing that tends to trigger white fragility, generalizing about white people. As a sociologist, I'm really comfortable generalizing about white people. Social life is predictable and patterned, in really observable ways, and we've got to grapple with those patterns. But I can say this, that your opinions without sustained study, struggle, focus, mistake making, relationship building, repair, they're superficial because nothing in society gives you the information you need to have more than that. In fact, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing racism, can you not? You can get through teacher education in this country without discussing racism. And if you're in a progressive teacher education program, you'll have one required multicultural education class. But that doesn't mean you'll be talking about racism. You might just be talking about how to introduce ethnic authors in February. Right? You can get through law school, you can get through social work, right? You can be seen as qualified to lead a major or minor institution in this country, to lead a group of people, to supervise people. You can be seen as qualified to do those things with virtually no ability whatsoever to engage with any complexity or nuance in the issue of racism. Can you not? All right, so that is the first challenge, humility. The second is individualism. Apparently white people do not understand socialization. Because we really think that we are exempt from it. And of course, the irony of that is because we're socialized to value the individual, we put a lot of effort there, but we think that, just because I say I am or want to be, I could be exempt from these forces. So that is another challenge. And again, generalizing, suggesting race has meaning for white people will often trigger white fragility. We think if we don't see it, it isn't there, and you haven't explained it to me yet enough so that I understand it, so I'm not really sure that could be valid. And we tend to use our reactions as a way out. There is no way we're going to get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. And I am comfortable racially virtually 24/7. So that is not my goal, but we will often use that lack of comfort as a sign that something's been done wrong rather than something probably has been done right. And that we need to use that as a way in to the deeper framework that would cause such upset rather than use it as a way out. And we don't understand racism as a system. So this is another key challenge, which leads me to chapter 2, which is racism and white supremacy. Racism is a system, not an event. And it's the system we're in. And none of us could be, and none of us were exempt from its forces. But the way we're taught to think of racism functions beautifully to not only obscure the system, but to exempt us from its forces, right? Or to have us believe we are exempted from its forces. Now, as a white person, I was raised to be racially illiterate. And I actually think all white people are raised to be racially illiterate in this culture. And in gaining racial literacy, I have had to understand not just the collective dynamics and dimensions of racism, but how racism impacts different groups who are perceived and defined as people of color, how it impacts them differently, right? So not all peoples of color experience racism differently. The things I've internalized about different groups is different, where and how they are positioned always in relation to whiteness or far away from whiteness, and how that manifests, right? All of that must be understood. But after a good 20 plus years of talking day in and day out to white people about racism, I feel very confident to say that there is something profoundly anti-Black in this culture. And that nothing seems to turn white people's cranks of resentment, like thinking Black people got something over on us that they didn't deserve. And the deeper belief is that they're inherently undeserving. I believe in the white mind, Black people are the ultimate racial other, right? And that there are these bookends. And again, your perceived proximity to each end of that impacts how you're going to experience your racialization. So having said that, and not really having time to do history, I just want to give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-Blackness in this country since its beginning, and this slide will be deliberately dense. We can literally think about it as state-sanctioned, organized crime, but at least discrimination against African Americans from the beginning. And it starts with kidnapping and 300 years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. And about a quarter of the way in, you see bans on testifying against whites, which made it technically legal to murder Black people in this country, and you are now in my lifetime. And I'm gonna say it again because again, a lot of white people seem to think it ended a long time ago. We're in my lifetime about a quarter of the way through that slide. And then we see about 2/3 of the way through employment discrimination, and we are in 2018 with copious empirical evidence. Right? So let's pick it up there. Employment discrimination, educational discrimination, biased laws and policing practices, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, the school to prison pipeline, disproportionate special ed referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media representation, historical omissions, and so much more. It is a system, not an event. It's the system we're in, and none of us could be, and none of us were exempt from its forces. If we want to be unique and special individuals, then we need to figure out how whatever we see is special and different about us set us up into that system, because it did. So I'm talking, I know white people really well. I'm talking X, and you're like, ha, I was Y, right? Okay, you were Y, most whites are X. How did Y set you up? It did. The question is not if, it's how. I repeat it, it's a system, not an event. And how do we cope with the moral trauma of what I just read to you? Resmaa Menakem has a beautiful book, My Grandmother's Hands, where he talks about racial trauma. There's a trauma, I believe, to white people of racism, but I don't think it's a moral trauma. Right? And it's a piece of white fragility, not being able to face our complicity in this system. Well, historically, we projected our sins onto the Black body. Right? Lazy, shiftless, criminal. We projected our sins onto the Black body. Today, in addition to doing that, we obscure the system of racism that we uphold, and we exempt ourselves from its forces. Right? And we do this in a way that appears to be progressive, right? That race doesn't matter to us. This is the board after the grand champion college Jeopardy round. Right? And for me, it just speaks volumes, right? Not again, knowing our history and being able to trace it into the present is one of the volumes it speaks. Another one is, that is the history of this country. It is not their history. It didn't happen in a vacuum. So one of the aspects of institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone, to position it as objective and universal, right? And to tell the story, right? The story of the other when we are not in relationship with the other. Right? So I want to give you an example of the power of the story. And I want to do it through the Jackie Robinson story. You all know Jackie Robinson? Right? So Jackie Robinson has been quite celebrated for doing something. What's the tagline that goes with Jackie Robinson? He broke the color line, right? Now, so let's do a little discourse analysis. Because every year on the anniversary, we celebrate him breaking the color line. So think about what that invokes, right? He was exceptional. He was special. He did it. Finally, one of them had what it took to break through and play with us. Up until him, nobody had what it took. So subtext, inferior group. right? But he did it, and of course, the day he did it, the day he broke the color line, racism in sports ended. So imagine if we told a story like this. Jackie Robinson, the first black man that whites allowed to play Major League Baseball. And I want you to notice the difference in that story. One, that's the truth. It didn't matter how exceptional he was, and I actually don't believe he was the first most exceptional. But if we didn't say he could play, he couldn't play. If he walked out onto that field before we said you can walk out on the field, the police would have removed him. It wasn't up to him. Right? Now, the reason I want us to tell the story the second way is, one, because it's true, and two, because I need role models. Right? How did white people get organized? What did they do behind the scene? What barriers did they face? What challenges, right? What strategies did they use? And could we use any of those today and adapt any of those today? Right? It's not about me wanting to point out how bad white people are. So chapter 3 looks at racism after the civil rights movement. And after the civil rights movement, it made a brilliant adaptation. So post-civil rights, racism got reduced to the following formula. A racist is an individual who consciously does not like people based on race and is intentionally mean to them. Always an individual, must be conscious, must be intentional. And that definition exempts virtually all white people from the system of racism. This definition, I believe, is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on racism. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on racism? Yeah. It makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from being socialized in a racist culture in which white supremacy is the bedrock. Because you suggest that anything I have done is racially problematic in any way, and I'm going to hear a question to my moral character. And I'm going to need to defend my moral character. You know, we've probably seen this a million times, right? So that definition actually functions to protect racism, even as it looks like progress, right? Racism became bad post-civil rights. So this sets up what I think about as the good-bad binary. That kind of, it's either or, right? Racists are bad, not racists are good. And we know how to fill that in, don't we? Ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited, definitely old. And when we die off, there'll be no more racism. You know, I've been working with a lot of these tech companies that when I walk around, I think to myself, God, I guess you have to be under 30 to work here. And I'm telling you, they cannot think critically about race. And the people of color that work with these young people are in so much pain, right? No, I get asked all the time, do you think young people today are less racist? Oh, actually, the question usually begins with, don't you think? And just a heads up, if you approach me with, don't you think, the answer is no. Because that's not an open question. But no, I don't actually think young people today are less racist, because that consciousness hasn't changed our outcomes. In fact, they're getting worse. Right? Okay. So Southern for sure, don't you think? Around here, I'm pretty sure they live in Fife. I've never been to Fife, but on the way to Tacoma, I see Fife. I'm like, ooh, boy, it looks like racists live there. And when I'm on my way up north, it's like Smoky Point. Okay? All right. Not racists are good. We're educated, progressive, open-minded, well-intended. We're young. We're northern. We live on Finney Ridge. But we're all moving to Portland really soon. Because Whole Foods is so corporate now. Again, this is the root of virtually all white defensiveness, and it just functions so beautifully to exempt us. So we just have to get rid of it. And when white people hear me and they feel angry and pissed off and defensive, can I just say this now that you guys are loosening me up here? When you laugh at my jokes, I'm going to keep getting looser and looser. Damn white people are pissy about racism. We are so pissy on this topic. We're mean on this topic, right? And so if you're sitting here feeling that, just see if it isn't rooted in this definition. And if you cannot let go of this, you're just not going to be able to move forward. So aversive racism is a form of what sociologists call new racism, right? And so it's racism that progressive whites are most likely to hold, but because it conflicts with our identities as good people, we're most likely to be in denial about it. So let me find that piece. It's a manifestation of racism that well-intentioned people who see themselves as educated and progressive are more likely to exhibit. It exists under the surface of consciousness because it conflicts with consciously held beliefs of racial equity and justice. Aversive racism is a subtle but insidious form, as aversive racists enact racism in ways that allow them to maintain a positive self-image, e.g., I have lots of friends of color, I judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And whites enact racism while maintaining a positive self-image in many ways. For example, rationalizing racial segregation as unfortunate but necessary to access good schools. Rationalizing that our workplaces are virtually all white because people of color just don't apply. Avoiding direct racial language and using racially coded terms such as urban, underprivileged, diverse, sketchy, and good neighborhoods. Denying that we have few cross-racial relationships by proclaiming how diverse our community or workplace is, and attributing inequality between whites and people of color to causes other than racism. Consider a conversation I had with a white friend. She was telling me about a white couple who she knew who had just moved to New Orleans and bought a house for a mere $25,000. Of course, she immediately added, they also had to buy a gun, and Joan is afraid to leave the house. I immediately knew they had bought a home in a black neighborhood. This was a moment of white racial bonding between this couple who shared the story of racial danger and my friend, and then between my friend and me as she repeated the story. Through this tale, the four of us fortified familiar images of the horror of black space and drew boundaries between us and them without ever having to directly name race or openly express our disdain for black space. Notice that the need for a gun is a key part of this story. It would not have the degree of social capital it holds if the emphasis were on the price of the house alone. Rather, the story's emotional power rests on why a house would be that cheap. Because it's in a black neighborhood where white people literally might not get out alive. Yet while very negative and stereotypical representations of blacks were reinforced in that exchange, not naming race provided plausible deniability. In fact, in preparing to share this incident, I texted my friend and asked her the name of the city her friends had moved to. I also wanted to confirm my assumption that she was talking about a black neighborhood. I share the text exchange here. Hey, what city did you say your friends had bought a house in for $25,000? She replies, New Orleans. They said they live in a very bad neighborhood and they each have to have a gun to protect themselves. I wouldn't pay 5 cents for that neighborhood. I reply, oops. I assume it's a black neighborhood? Yes, you get what you pay for. I'd rather pay $500,000 and live somewhere where I wasn't afraid. I reply, I wasn't asking because I want to live there. I'm writing about this in my book. The way that white people talk about race without ever coming out and talking about race. She had a very interesting response to that. I wouldn't want you to live there because it's too far away from me. Notice that when I simply ask what city the house is in, she repeats the story about the neighborhood being so bad that her friends need guns, When I ask if the neighborhood is black, she's comfortable confirming that it is. But when I tell her that I'm interested in how whites talk about race without talking about race, she switches the narrative. Now her concern is about not wanting me to live so far away. This is a classic example of aversive racism, holding deep racial disdain that surfaces in daily discourse, but not being able to admit it because the disdain conflicts with our self-image and professed beliefs. Now, readers may be asking themselves, but if the neighborhood is really dangerous, why is acknowledging this danger a sign of racism? Research in implicit bias has shown that perceptions of criminal activity are influenced by race. White people will perceive dangers simply by the presence of black people. We cannot trust our perceptions when it comes to race and crime. But regardless of whether the neighborhood is actually more or less dangerous than other neighborhoods, what is salient about this exchange is how it functions racially and what that means for the white people engaged in it. For my friend and me, this conversation did not increase our awareness of the danger of some specific neighborhood. Rather, the exchange reinforced our fundamental beliefs about black people. Toni Morrison uses the term race talk to capture, quote, the explicit insertion into everyday life of racial signs and symbols that have no meaning other than positioning African Americans into the lowest level of the racial hierarchy, unquote. Casual race talk is a key component of white racial framing because it accomplishes the interconnected goals of elevating whites while demeaning people of color. Race talk always implies a racial us and them. So folks who have seen me present before know that I use this metaphor, and I do tend to think in metaphors. And as I do the work that I do and I talk on a daily basis to white people, I literally got this image in my mind of a dock or a pier. And what it signifies for me are two things. One, how surface or superficial our narratives are. But also the dock, if you look from above, appears to be floating on the water. But it's not. There is an entire structure submerged under the water that props that dock up. It rests on literally pillars anchored into the ocean floor. And everything I do in my work is trying to get us off the top of the dock and under there to examine those pillars. Because despite all the bullshit on top of the dock, our outcomes have not changed. Right? So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on? So as I listen to these narratives, I think about them in two overall categories, color blind and color celebrate. So let's start with the first set, color blind. Probably the number one colorblind racial narrative is, I was taught to treat everyone the same. Anybody ever heard that one? Okay. Let me just tell you, when I hear this from a white person, and I hear it frequently, there's a bubble over my head. And it has a few things in it. The first thing is, oh, this person doesn't understand basic socialization. This person doesn't understand culture. Ooh, this person is not particularly self-aware. Right? And I need to give a heads up to the white folks in the room. When people of color hear us say this, they're generally not thinking, all right, I am talking to a woke white person right now. Usually some form of eye rolling, and actually I recently co-facilitated with a black woman who said, that is the most dangerous white person to me. Okay? So it's not functioning the way we think it is, and this is another piece of humility for us. We are the least qualified to determine whether we understand this or not. Because so often the things that we think convey that are not conveying that. And all of these are within that, it's in the past, just everyone struggles. My parents weren't racist, that's why I'm not racist. Oh, my parents were racist, that's why I'm not racist. Doesn't matter really what we say first, what comes next must be, I'm not racist. So-and-so just happened to be, but it has nothing to do with race. And it also has nothing to do with why no one in the office gets along with her. And this is another one I actually asked white folks to remove from their vocabulary. Oh, by the way, along with reverse racism, which there's no such thing. Right? All right. Remove from your vocabulary anything on the topic of race that begins with just happen to be regardless, including that your neighborhood just happened to be white. Right? Yes, but at the human level, when we make that move, right? Get race off the table and let's position some kind of shared universal experience. There isn't one in this physical plane that we live in a society deeply separate and unequal by race. So I call these colorblind because they basically say, I don't see it, and if I see it, it has no meaning. And there's a question that has never failed me in my efforts to uncover how we pull this off. And that question is not, is this true or is this false? Because if we apply that question, we're going to argue and argue and argue. The question that has never failed me is, how do these narratives function in the conversation? How does it function? And if we ask that question, we can see that all of these narratives function to exempt the person from any part of the problem. All of them take race off the table. All of them close rather than open the exploration. And in doing that, all of them protect the current racial hierarchy and the white position within it. It doesn't have to be your intention. And I'll just be blunt. I'm not interested in your intention. I'm interested in how this functions. What is the impact of these narratives? They are closers, not openers. Well, probably the folks in this room, we're beyond colorblindness, right? What do we say? Right? Where's my little clicker? Here it is. Okay. We say things like this. Oh, I work in a very diverse environment. If we can't say that, and many of us can't, we'll come up with some kind of proximity. Okay? I have people calling my family. Me? I'm not racist. I used to live in New York. This one will get used interchangeably with, I'm not racist, I'm from Canada. I'm not racist, I'm from Hawaii. I'm not racist, I'm from Europe. I'm not racist, I was in the military. Apparently there are no racism in any of those places. When I hear that one, I used to live in New York, I was thinking, oh my God, you walked by people of color and didn't lose your shit? That's amazing. Okay. So how many of you in a conversation with a white person have heard some version of those narratives right there, those three? Okay. All right, and if we're going to be really honest, we've said some version of these narratives. Right? That last one, sociologists actually have a term for it. It's called the inoculation case. I've been near people of color and it stripped me of my racism. And I want you to notice how often white people invoke proximity as evidence. This is important because it helps reveal what's under the dock. It helps reveal what we think racism is, that we would invoke proximity to show that we're not racist. And I need to understand what I think racism is if I'm going to unpack my role in it, right? So let's do some discourse analysis. Let's think critically about these three narratives. When a white person invokes one of these narratives in a conversation about racism, they're giving you their evidence, right? Racism comes up, I say this is my evidence. In my mind, what's that my evidence of? What do I want to make sure you know? I'm not racist, all right? So, in order to be good at evidence, it must distinguish me from a racist. So apparently, a racist cannot do these things, or this wouldn't be good evidence. So a racist cannot work 3 cubicles down from a person of color. Could not have people call their family, and would find living in New York intolerable, even though I could think of at least one racist that lives in New York. So, now I have yet to let go of that little joke because I do enjoy it, but it does rest on the good-bad binary. I'm on the same continuum the person I'm thinking of is on. Just want to be clear about that. Okay, so I'm going to just ask a rhetorical question to the people of color in this room, and I'm going to look at my dear friend Aisha over there and Paula, and I'm going to say, could a racist work 3 cubicles down from you? Hell yes. All right. People of color, do you have white people in your life who you love deeply and who on occasion reveal their internalized racial superiority? Their internalized racist assumptions about the world? Other white people, do you hear that? Could you even be married to them? And they could still? It doesn't disappear the day they fall in love with you? Okay. All right. So I hope I mock it a bit because it's ridiculous, right? But it's so ubiquitous. So we really just got to ask ourselves, well, what do I think it is, and what am I saying, and how is that functioning, right? And clearly this rests on that, on that simplistic definition. Apparently a lot of white people think that a racist cannot tolerate any proximity, even the sight of people of color. And so if there's any friendliness across race, there cannot be racism. This is another thing that makes us so difficult in these conversations. So I'm just gonna put it right out here. As a result of being born and raised as a white person in this culture, I have a racist worldview. I have deep racist biases. I have developed racist patterns. And I have investments in a system that has served me very well and is very comfortable for me, and it really helped me get over sexism and classism that I struggle with. And I also have investments in not seeing any of that, for what it would mean for my identity and what it would require of me in action. Right? You can choose it, don't want it, got it. And it's actually incredibly transformative and liberating to begin from that premise, so that you can begin to think, well, how's it coming out in me? So that I might be able to stop that or ameliorate that, rather than it's not coming out in me. I sometimes think if I went into the bathroom and I came out and the back of my dress was hiked into my pantyhose and my ass was showing, I sure hope you'd let me know. And I wouldn't say to you, how dare you suggest my ass is showing? And you better proceed as if it isn't. And yet, you know, the worst fear of a white progressive is that we're going to say or do something racist. But by God, don't you dare say that I just said or did something racist. Rather than, thank you. You know, I didn't see myself doing that, and now I can do something different. All right, I was in the Peace Corps. I marched in the 60s. I voted for Obama. I'm on the equity team. Could go on. I already know all this. I told you I've been to Costa Rica and tutored there for a week with the little children. And this is a real Seattle one. We don't like how white our neighborhood is, but we had to move here for the schools. What could we do? I think it's very disingenuous. I think we do like how white our neighborhoods are. And that's another conversation. All right, so these are not colorblind, these are color celebrate. I love it, right? And I'm gonna just say this. I love it in the right doses. I like it in the Montessori school with the children of the international workers that come from Microsoft. So again, if we apply the same question, not true, false, or right, wrong, but how do these narratives function in the conversation, we get the same answer. They all exempt the person from any part of the problem. They all take race off the table. They all close rather than open. And they all protect the current racial hierarchy and the white position within it. They're actually, in practice and impact, not any more progressive. And they have not changed our outcomes. So we have to get under here and see what's going on. And what I think is going on, what I think of as the linchpins of new racism, right, is the good-bad binary, and that one's really effective. Deep implicit bias, which you can't help but absorb. This precious ideology of individualism. At the same time, this idea that we don't speak from any particular position, but speak for all of humanity. And people of color speak for their group, and when we're interested in hearing about that, we'll ask them, but we'll cover everything else, right? Any people of color get asked to be on the equity team automatically? when it's not even necessarily your interest or, okay. Internalized superiority, which you cannot help but have if you are raised white in this culture. And in some level an investment in not seeing this. And finally, the power of segregation to hold it all in place. The profound, I think for me, the most profound message of all is that I could call a white neighborhood good. I could call a school filled with all white teachers and white children a good school. That the fundamental message is that there's no inherent value in the perspectives or experiences of people of color. So these messages are raining down on us relentlessly, 24/7, and we don't have umbrellas. And nothing could and nothing did exempt us from their forces. It's on us to figure out how they shape us, not if. Right? So all of this sets up some patterns, right? Preference for racial segregation, lack of understanding what racism is, seeing ourselves as individuals, not understanding that we bring our history with us. History matters. It's a history of harm. Assuming everyone is having our experience, arrogance, lack of humility, unwillingness to listen, dismissing what we don't understand, apathy towards racial justice. You know, after, again, 20 plus years, I think most white people are pretty apathetic about racial injustice. Inability to or lack of interest in sustaining relationships with people of color, wanting to jump over the hard personal work and get to solutions. Confusing not agreeing with not understanding. Is it possible that you're not actually informed enough to disagree? Have you ever had somebody say, no, you misunderstood, no, you misunderstood? What if the person understood you perfectly? In fact, they even understood what you meant, and you don't understand how what you meant comes from a racist framework. A need to maintain white solidarity. Right? That's the unspoken agreement amongst white people that we'll keep each other comfortable around our racism. Highest priority is saving face. I always like to say, you know, when I do a caucus group or something and the white people are afraid I might think they're racist, I think you're racist. I do. I think I am too, right? But yeah, let's be done with that. And actually your carefulness and you're hiding yourself and you're not contributing to the conversation won't actually change that assessment at all. And people of color don't find that to build trust. Defensiveness, of course, and a focus on intentions over impact. So when any of this is triggered, we get off our white racial equilibrium. So what is white racial equilibrium? Well, racial comfort, that's for sure. Seeing ourselves as individuals, seeing ourselves as just human. Obliviousness, well, it's this funny, there's like a stew inside of white people that makes us really irrational on this topic. And I've tried to kind of identify some of those pieces. But one of them is that we really are taught not to see this. So if you're a person of color scratching your head thinking, how can they not see this? Like, I just don't believe they don't see this. We actually really don't see it. Oh, and hell yes, we know it. And we do see it, but we cannot admit that. Both these things are actually true. We don't see it and we do see it but can't admit to it. And it's part of what makes us so irrational. Right? Apathy, dominance, control. I'm working on this huge contract with racial justice for a large organization, and they asked us to take the word white out of all the slides. That's a great example, isn't it, of white fragility? So don't name white. Don't name that's our racial equilibrium, right? And entitlement to people of color's bodies. Resmaminikim talks about, it's really been only in the last couple of decades that people of color have had dominion over their own bodies. And so entitlement to people of color's bodies comes out in lots of ways, right? From just our white entitlement to black bodies is a man quietly, solemnly, and respectfully going on one knee. And the eruption, right? The criminalization, right? The great example of white fragility, and it connected to this last bullet here, is the eruption of umbrage and criminalization when a black man simply went down on one knee respectfully. Talking about Colin Kaepernick. What an example. So, what interrupts our racial equilibrium? Well, if you challenge objectivity, if you talk openly about race, if you challenge white entitlement to racial comfort, if you challenge to the expectation that people of color will serve us and do our work for us, if you break with white solidarity, you challenge white racial innocence. Oh, and by the way, you can download all this on handouts from my website. oh, wait a minute. And it's in the book. It's in the book. All right. Challenge individualism, challenge to meritocracy, challenge to white authority, all right. Challenge to white centrality, challenge to universalism. Right? Suggesting that maybe, in fact, we don't speak for all of humanity. We speak from a particular perspective, and it's deeply limited. Okay? So this leads to white fragility. And we actually have the poster boy for white fragility right here in the front row, because I'm married to him, and I made him pose in the kitchen. And he's like, everyone's going to think I'm an asshole now. And I'm like, yeah, they are. Open the dictionary, look up white fragility, they're going to see your picture. Okay, so back to something more serious. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So when all of this insular, coddled environment builds an inability to bear witness, inability to have capacity to hold the discomfort. I've been thinking lately that part of what it means to be white is to never have to bear witness to the pain of racism on people of color, and never having to bear witness to the pain I've caused to people of color, never having to be accountable to that pain, right? And all the ways that I push off accountability, right? And so when I thought of this term, white fragility, the fragility part, we're fragile in that we can barely tolerate the slightest challenge, right? I mean, I'll show you my emails. Just the suggestion that being white has meaning will set us off. But there's a continuum. And so we're fragile in that way, but it's not fragile at all in its impact. It's really effective, right? I need you to stop. I need to get back into my position and my entitlement and my comfort, and I will do what I need to do to get you to stop. And I think that white fragility functions as a kind of white racial bullying. We make it so miserable for people of color to talk to us about their experiences, to call us in, that most of the time they don't, because it's not worth getting punished more. You know, trust me, they take home so much of it because it so rarely goes well. Right? And I'm just ask a rhetorical question to people of color in the room. How often have you tried to talk to white people about our inevitable and often racist behaviors, and how'd that go well for you? Okay, I mean, literally, like not even once, right? And so It's weaponized defensiveness. It's weaponized hurt feelings. It's weaponized denial and obliviousness. And so I'm not the 1%. I've never even been a manager. But I can control the people of color in my orbit through white fragility, right? And so I also think of it as a form of everyday white racial control. You can be in my orbit, and I'll use you as diversity cover, as long as you keep me comfortable. But if you challenge me, you're going to become a personal problem, and you're going to be ejected. And boy, do we see this in the workplace. We want you on the committee. We're not going to pay you anymore, but we do want you on the committee, as long as you don't actually do what we asked you to be on the committee to do, right? All right. Oh, I got to read a piece from 112. I got a story that I really want to read. Okay, so I was working with a group of educators who had been meeting regularly for at least 8 sessions. The group was composed of the equity teams for a public school system, self-selected by people who wanted to support equity efforts in their schools. I had just finished an hour-long presentation titled, Seeing the Water, Whiteness in Daily Life. This presentation is designed to make visible the relentless messages of white superiority, etc. The room appeared to be with me, open and receptive, with many nodding along in agreement. Then a white teacher raised her hand and told a story about an interaction she had as she drove alongside a group of parents protesting the achievement gap in her school. And she then proceeded to imitate one mother in particular who offended her. "You don't understand our children," this mother had called out to her as she drove by. By the stereotypical way that the white teacher imitated the mother, we all knew that the mother was black. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath at her imitation, which was bordering on racial mockery. While the teacher's concluding point was that, on reflection, she came to realize that the mother was right and that she really didn't understand children of color, the emotional thrust of the story was her umbrage at the mother for making this assumption. For the room, the emotional impact was on her stereotypical imitation of an angry black woman. As this story came to a close, I had a decision to make. Should I act with integrity and point out what was racially problematic about the story? After all, making racism visible was literally what I had been hired to do. Further, several African American teachers in the room had certainly noticed the reinforcement of a racist stereotype. To not intervene would be, yet again, another white person choosing to protect white feelings rather than interrupt racism. A white person who billed herself as a racial justice consultant, no less. Yet I would be taking the risk of losing the group, given the likelihood that the woman would become defensive, shut down, and the room would split into those who thought I had mistreated her and those who didn't. This happens every time you actually call it out in the moment in the room, right? And I decided to do what would maintain my integrity, and I called it out. And I called it out as diplomatically as I could. I just said, oh, teachable moment. I'm going to ask you not to tell that story again. Here's why. Here's how you could tell it in a way that doesn't reinforce that. We went back and forth a little bit. But to make a long story short, of course, the room did erupt in twos. She left the group. She quit the group. This was the 8th session for equity teams. And again, all the focus was on had I or hadn't I mistreated her. Right? And this is often what happens. So whites receiving feedback kind of above and below, right? What feelings do white people have when we often try to give them feedback on our racist patterns, right? Tell me if you don't recognize these. Attacked, silenced, shamed, accused, insulted, judged, angry, scared, outraged. Yeah? Now, how do we act when we feel this way? Right? Well, we withdraw, we cry, We go silent, we argue, we deny, we focus on our intentions, we seek forgiveness, we explain, we insist there was a misunderstanding. Yep. And so what kind of claims do we make to justify behaving this way and feeling this way? I know people of color. I marched in the 60s. I took this in college. I was a minority in Japan. The real oppression is class. You misunderstood me, you're playing the race card. If you knew me or understood me, you'd know I can't be racist. This is not welcoming to me. You're making me feel guilty. I want to say something about shame. Whenever white people jump to a narrative really quickly on racism, I'm always suspicious of it. And shame is one we jump to really fast. White progressives really, really like to lean on how much racial shame they feel. And I would actually ask you to think about, on a daily basis, how often do you, if you are white, feel racial shame? Seriously. Well, first of all, probably just when racism comes up, and even then. So maybe 2% of the time? I was in New York recently, and I stepped over a homeless man who was black on my way into Whole Foods. And I felt shame for just a minute, but then Rainier cherries are in season, and I forgot all about it. I mean, I'm serious. Like, that's how that functions. I really don't think we feel that shame that much. But even if we do, then you have to ask yourself, how is it functioning? What does it do for you? What is the cultural capital that you get from that? And if you can't answer that it's somehow moving you forward in your anti-racist efforts, then you're going to have to get through it, right? Okay. It's just one little innocent thing. Some people find offense, you hurt my feelings, this is political correctness, I don't feel safe. I'll just really quickly say the word safe coming out of the mouths of white people on topic of racism is illegitimate. Because what does safety mean from a position of social, historical, institutional, cultural power and privilege? No, it's generally we don't feel comfortable. But that doesn't have as much cultural capital. It's not as precious. Problem is your tone. And I know what it is to be oppressed. So if we think about the doc, right? The feelings, the behaviors, the claims, what could be the underlying assumptions that would lead us to make these claims, right? Well, as a white person, I will be the judge of whether racism has occurred. My learning's finished. I know all I need to know. Racism can only be intentional. Not having intended it cancels it out. White people who experience another form of oppression can't experience racial privilege. If I'm a good person, I can't be racist. My unexamined perspective is equal to an informed one. I'm entitled to remain comfortable, so you have made a very serious social breach. As a white person, I know the best way to challenge racism, and you're doing it wrong. Nice people cannot be racist. If I can't see it, it's not legitimate. If I have any proximity to people of color, I can't be racist. If I have no proximity to people of color, I can't be racist because I'm racially innocent. I would make a case that white people who grew up on farms in rural environments and there are no people of color around actually are less sheltered from racism because you are left to rely on the most problematic sources for your understanding of people of color. My worldview is objective and yours isn't. I don't know what else could be functioning under there, right? So how does all that function? Maintains white solidarity, closes off self-reflection, minimizes, silences the discussion, makes white people the victims, protects a limited worldview, takes race off the table, focuses on the messenger, not the message, rallies more resources to white people, protects racism. I could get into this really deep, but here's what I just want to say about this. The reason I like this picture when I do presentations is because for me this is an amplified visual of institutional power. And if I walked in that room as a woman, because that would be the salient identity for me in that room, it would be visceral to me, the lifetime of entitlement exuding out of these men's pores. Right? And so if you can see that, if you can see not only the lifetime of entitlement, but if you were to suggest to them that maybe they should have some women or people of color in that group, I can't know, but I believe to my core they would feel contempt. Because they don't see the perspectives of women and people of color as valuable. I believe that to my core. I don't know them, but I'm pretty damn sure. If I can see it in them, then, and I don't relate to them, right? But what version of that is coming from my pores? What version of that is visceral for people of color when I'm in the room, right? So, women of color, you want to be the one that goes in there and helps those white women see their racism? Does that sound good? All by yourself? They need some diversity. All right, so my point is I can be in this room experiencing sexism and patriarchy, and I can be in this room perpetrating racism. Right? White women don't actually land any more softly on people of color. And I think when we don't back people of color, the betrayal and the hurt is deeper. Because we have a potential way in, and we use it often as a way out. If you don't think I'm an angry feminist, ask the poster boy for white fragility over here. But our resentment about sexism can cause us to not back people of color and actually collude with the benefits of whiteness to get a little bit ahead, right? Okay. So I'm going to end by just bringing this question up so that I could preempt it, because I really don't like this question. And if this is the question you have right now, if you're white and this is the question you have right now, then I have one for you. What has allowed you to remain ignorant about how to interrupt racism? Why in 2018 is that your question? And that's actually a sincere, challenging question. Because if you really start to map it out, you'll have your answer. So I want to share what could be under that dock if we had a transformed framework. But before I do it, I want to give an example of a moment of racism that I recently perpetrated. Okay? And instead of reading it from the book, it is written in the book, but it's easier for me to just say it. I used to be the director of equity for a large nonprofit. And on the equity team were 3 people, myself, the co-director, and the executive assistant. And Deborah and Marcia were black women. So there were 3 of us, 2 of us were black, 1 was white. And we hired a consultant, the organization hired a consultant to come in and design the web page and the website. And so she was going around setting meetings with all the departments to find out what we did so she could build each department's particular page. So she scheduled a meeting with the equity team, and it was 3 in the afternoon, and we went in, and it turns out that she was also a black woman. I will call her Angela. And right away, she had this survey that had lots of questions about what we do. But it was the afternoon. I found the survey kind of annoying, and it was tedious, and it didn't really speak to what we do, so I kind of shoved it aside. And I said, let me explain. We go out into the different satellite offices, and we lead, racial justice trainings. In fact, we went up to the far north one recently, and Deborah was asked not to come back. I guess her hair scared the white people. make this little joke, right? Because Deborah has long locked hair. The meeting ends, and I wish I could tell you that I realized what I had said, but I didn't. So a few days later, Marcia came to me and said, Angela was really offended by that joke you made about black women's hair. And, that I know better, right? And so I immediately understood and said, thank you for letting me know. And so I followed a series of steps to repair that. And the first thing I did is I called a friend of mine, another white woman named Christine, and said, I need to process something with you. And, I vented my anxiety, my embarrassment, and then when I kind of got that off, we put our heads together, and it's like, let's think about how your racism was manifesting in that meeting. Get really clear, okay? I got clear, and I felt ready to then come back to Angela. So I called her, and I said, would you be willing to grant me the opportunity to repair the racism I perpetrated towards you in the meeting last week? And she said yes. Now, she could have said no, and I was prepared. In fact, I thought she was going to say no. I thought she was going to say, whoa, are you a hypocrite? And if I could not hold that, then I was not going to be making an authentic repair, right? So she didn't say no, however. She said yes. And so we met, and I said, I just want to own that racism and that joke. And so we talked about it, and she basically said, I don't know you, I have no relationship with you, I have no trust with you, and I do not want to be joking about black women's hair in a professional work meeting with a white woman I don't know. Right? So I just want to be really clear so that white folks understand that piece of it. The other piece that I owned was that in my cockiness, I was being the woke white person and making fun of the white people who didn't get it. So I was making that move. I was credentialing myself. So I owned that. And then because I knew that Christine and I as two white people would probably have missed some things, I said, Angela, is there anything I missed? And she said, yes. That survey you so glibly shoved aside, I wrote that survey. And I have spent my life justifying my intelligence to white people. Okay, that was just like because I immediately got it. Never occurred to me she wrote the survey. Looking back at how I just dismissed it. So I owned that. I apologized. And then, next step I took was, is there anything else that needs to be said or heard that we might move forward? And she said, yes. The next time you run your racism at me, I want to pause right there. Notice that she didn't say if. She basically said, if we're going to be working together, I know you're going to run your racism at me again. So the next time you do it, would you like your feedback publicly or privately? Yeah, I loved her for that. And I said, oh, publicly, definitely, right? Like, I think most white people would have said, oh, God, no, privately. But it's really, really, I told her, it's really important that other white people see that I am not free of these patterns. I run them less. I'm not defensive when I run them. Notice I never explain my intentions. I have very good repair skills, but I have these patterns. And it's important that other white people see that and that I have the opportunity to model non-defensiveness. And so anything else? Nope. Are we good? Yep, let's move on. And we moved on. And actually, there was more trust there. Because one of the things she said to me is, what you did in that meeting happens to us every day. This, what you're doing right now, this does not happen. Thank you. What I'm looking for is, where can I go with you? Right? Repair. So I want to end with what could be under that dock if we had a transformed frame, because we can't get where we need to go from where we are right now. Right? Being good or bad is not relevant, right? Racism is a multi-layered system infused in everything. Whites have blinders on racism. I have blinders on racism. Racism is complex. I don't have to understand it in order for it to be valid. White comfort maintains the racial status quo. Discomfort is necessary and important. I must not confuse comfort with safety. I am safe in discussions of race. The antidote to guilt is action. I bring my group's history with me. History matters. I might see myself as just an individual. The people of color in my life see me as a white individual. The question is not if, but how. Nothing exempts me from the forces of racism. Whites are unconsciously invested in racism. I am unconsciously invested in racism. I want you to imagine if white people internalize this framework, how revolutionary it would be, right? Bias is implicit. I don't expect to be aware of mine without a lot of effort, right? Feedback from people of color indicates trust because it is a huge moment of risk across a deep history of harm, right? Feedback on white racism is really difficult to give. How I receive it is not as relevant as the feedback itself. You bring it to me upset, bring it to me upset. There are no rules for how you should tell me that I've harmed you. It takes courage to break with white solidarity. How can I support those that do? How can I back? If I'm not willing to step out and take a risk, how can I back other white people who do instead of tearing them down? Finding that one thing that I said in this talk tonight that you can grab onto so that you don't have to look at yourself. Given socialization, it's more likely that I am the one who doesn't understand the issue. Can you imagine if white people were coming from that place? Racism hurts, even kills people of color 24/7. Interrupting it is more important than my feelings, ego, or self-image. Thank you. I only have time for 2 questions, so here's the one I'm going to answer. Will your book be available in audio? Yes. Okay. This one, how can a person of color navigate around white fragility in the workplace when direct confrontation usually ends in retaliation? Yeah, I mean, the first thing I just want white people to understand how much psychic and emotional labor people of color go through to walk on eggshells around us. You know, white people so bitterly complain, oh, you mean I can't say anything anymore? I have to walk on eggshells? Please. The emotional labor and the knots people of color tie themselves into so they don't trigger us, it is just heart-wrenching. And so I guess the first thing I want to say is I want us to knock this nonsense off so that this doesn't have to be the question. But it is the question. So there are different strategies. I actually think that choosing not to address it for people of color can be an empowered choice. I got to get through the day. I'm not throwing my pearls. So, no, I'm going to let it go. And that's actually a choice I'm making, and it's an empowered choice. Another strategy can be to elicit one of those white progressives who says they are an ally, then step up and not to take care of you. But there are times when that's a really good strategy. So much of my training came from women of color saying, you go talk to that person that's giving us a hard time in the training. They're going to hear it from you better. And, you know, I'm from Seattle. I'm as conflict avoidant as the rest of us who are white. But that really built up my stamina, right? So just really quickly, those are some strategies. And because I know it's late and because of time, I'm gonna close. So just thank you guys all. Our work will never be finished.
Okay, so I didn't interrupt at all. I know, I caught that. My bad. What you want me to do? Just step in all the time? I was reading the chat. I was in there looking around, seeing what people were talking about. These different things over here. So what I wasn't trying to do, and a couple people said that was like race baiting. I'm not even sure what you mean by that. It's, you know, just sharing a presentation and trying to open up dialogue, or helping to understand aspects of this dialogue. It's I mean, I think it's necessary for the most part, because if we're gonna move forward, if we're all supposed to get to this point to where we all feel like we're part of the human family, we're going to need to understand each other a little better, and we're going to need to break down like all of the narratives, because we have, I've seen so many people, even in the chat today, race is a social construct. Yeah, it is. But we all exist within that social construct. We also exist in the social construct of the financial system. So we still have to learn financial literacy. So, we don't just ignore the financial construct that's been put around us. So if we understand that, race is also a social construct, and we should better get an understanding of how to navigate that social construct. The effects that this social construct has had, and how it may have affected yourself and other people. So once we get to that point, then we can start moving along, having these conversations. But the thing here is just that the defense mechanisms is what she was talking about. How there's defensiveness automatically when the topic of race is brought up, to a point to where people want to just get up and leave. I'm looking at the chat numbers. It was over 100 a while ago. It ain't at 100 now. Probably not going to get a whole lot of likes on this one, because stuff just gets uncomfortable, and then it's just easy to walk away. Hell, I might come back later with some Jane Elliott. She does this exercise with people in different areas, and she does this thing where it's called the blue eye brown eye test. We might come back in an hour or so with that, and we'll go over that. But we need to figure out race relations a little bit better in light of what's going on right now. I don't think that everybody that I don't think that the people that are destroying stuff in these cities are actually part of the protesters. I believe that they are people that are being paid to infiltrate these protests and cause damage to property, and go looting and doing all that stuff just to escalate things. But the people on the ground are starting to catch it. I'm just hoping that we can come to a point to where we can agree on these things. We can open up the dialogue and come to a point to where we can actually have these conversations without stuff getting too heated, or just throwing the whole situation out. Okay. I'll go ahead and cut this one off. Yeah, we just might come back with some Jane Elliott. Let me see if this thing continued to stream. It might have. The page just reopened. Okay. So anyway, yeah, I appreciate you all for coming to hang out this time. No, I wasn't trying to do that. Let me see. Nope, not gonna exit stream. I'm gonna get around to. I'm trying to find these super chats so I can shout them out. I know it was Chucky Stallworth. Just got one from what was that? What'd you say? Geekcraft Studios. I never thought we would agree. Huh? Okay, appreciate it. Glad we could do that. Glad we could agree on something, y'all. Appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Let me turn on some outro music. I'm gonna say goodnight to everybody, but I'm still gonna keep looking for this area for these super chats. I'm not leaving until we get that done. So you can tune out now if you want to hop off, but it's just shenanigans from here on out, pretty much. But we can get along. We just got to be able to communicate. Y'all know about that in relationships, but relationships aren't just these intimate situations you find yourself in. We need to be able to communicate across the color barriers, and we can't be afraid to engage or be offended, have our little feelings hurt, because we got to continue to make these things happen. If we're going to get to this peaceful world that we're all hoping and wishing for, then yo, we gotta talk, right? So there's that. Live stream settings, monetization. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, I saw that. It is killing me. Stream now, classic. Why am I not able to find this thing? It's getting on my nerves. Am I gonna have to go all the way back? I can't go back that far. Say thank you to everybody who put up a super chat. I used to take pictures of the screen back in the day doing these things. Said don't feed the troll. What can one do about racism? Point it out whenever you see it. Analyze yourself. Try to catch yourself when you're manifesting racism. Or, you know, these ideologies, or you know, the way that the way that you conduct yourself. You know, you gotta watch yourself first off. You know, and try to pick up on it if you do display some of these issues. Oh look, I found it. Okay, so that was a shout out to Cross-Eyed Cricket Farms, appreciate you. Chusey, Chucky, Starworth. Do blacks deserve reparations? Yes or no? Yes. Everybody else got reparations, damn it. Anyway, Daniel Harbison, it's difficult by design. We have to realize when we use terms like racist, fascist, Nazi, we're using 1930s communist tactics to shut down combo. Absolutely. Appreciate the feedback, Daniel. Starworth. All right. Is she a flat earther? I don't know if she was a flat earther or not. I really don't. All right, let me see. Hold up. I'm trying to scroll down. I got another one down here. Okay. I don't know why I can't move this screen down here. Get down there. It's kind of getting on my nerves a little bit that I can't see that last one. Okay. At any rate, I'm thinking that's Geekcraft Studios. I appreciate y'all. I'm about to go ahead and cut this thing off, and probably cut off the last 5 minutes. We might do some Jane Elliott later. We'll see how we're feeling. All right, appreciate y'all. I'm gonna go ahead.